What you're about to hear isn't being reported in most Western media, and the implications are absolutely staggering. Right now, as we speak, millions of Iranians have taken to the streets in what could be the largest uprising in the Islamic Republic's history, and Vladimir Putin is watching his entire Middle Eastern strategy collapse in real time. But here's what they're not telling you. This isn't just about protests. This is about workers seizing critical infrastructure that keeps Russia's war machine running, and the clock is ticking on one of the most consequential geopolitical shifts of our lifetime. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why the next few weeks could literally reshape the global balance of power. Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening on the ground right now. On January 7th, 2026, workers at the South Pars gas refinery complex in Asaluye, one of Iran's most strategically vital energy hubs, walked off their jobs and joined nationwide strikes that have been building since late December. Now, if you don't know what South Pars is, let me break it down for you. This isn't some small facility. We're talking about 12 massive refineries that process natural gas from the world's largest gas field, shared between Iran and Qatar. This single complex produces roughly 40% of Iran's total gas output. 40%. And the workers there, fed up with unpaid wages, brutal working conditions, and an economy that's imploding faster than the Titanic, said enough is enough. But here's the catch. This wasn't an isolated incident. At the exact same time, protesters in Bandar Abbas, Iran's largest and most important port city on the Strait of Hormuz, flooded the streets chanting slogans that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. They're openly calling for the overthrow of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Videos verified by multiple sources show thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people standing shoulder to shoulder, refusing to back down even as security forces deployed live ammunition. And according to reports from human rights organizations, at least 538 people have been killed in just the last 2 weeks alone, with some estimates from Iran International suggesting that over 2,000 protesters may have died in just a 48-hour period during the internet blackout that the regime imposed. Now, I want you to understand something crucial here. Bandar Abbas isn't just any city. This port handles approximately 90% of Iran's total non-oil trade. Everything from food imports to industrial equipment flows through Bandar Abbas. When protesters shut down or disrupt operations there, they're essentially choking the Iranian economy's windpipe. And the timing couldn't be worse for Tehran, because Iran's currency, the rial, has been in absolute freefall. On January 6th, the rial hit 1.47 million to $1 on unofficial markets. To put that in perspective, back in 1979, when the Islamic Revolution happened, $1 was worth 70 rials. Today, it takes 1.47 million. That's a loss of roughly 99.9% of its value. The Iranian rial is now officially the least valuable currency on planet Earth, and Iranians are watching their life savings evaporate overnight. So, what triggered this? Well, the short answer is everything. Years of brutal economic sanctions, decades of corruption and mismanagement by the Revolutionary Guard, who control massive portions of Iran's economy, the catastrophic consequences of the 12-day war with Israel that happened in 2025, and the complete collapse of Iran's network of regional proxies. Hamas has been decimated in Gaza. Hezbollah got absolutely pummeled in Lebanon and lost most of its leadership. The Assad regime in Syria, Iran's closest Arab ally, and the crucial land bridge connecting Tehran to its proxies in Lebanon, fell apart faster than anyone predicted. Iran's so-called axis of resistance has crumbled, and regular Iranians are paying the price through hyperinflation that's making basic staples like meat, rice, and cooking oil unaffordable for average families. But here's where Putin comes into the picture, and this is where things get really interesting. Russia and Iran signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty in January 2025, just last year. This wasn't some symbolic gesture. This was a 20-year commitment that formalized military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and economic coordination between two countries that are both under heavy Western sanctions. For Putin, Iran has been absolutely critical to Russia's war effort in Ukraine. Iran has supplied Russia with thousands of Shahed drones that have terrorized Ukrainian cities and infrastructure for months. Iran has also been providing Russia with industrial goods and components that help Moscow circumvent sanctions and keep its war machine operational. And here's what most people don't realize. The economic relationship runs both ways. Russia has become Iran's largest trading partner for certain critical goods, particularly as Iran's traditional trade relationships with Turkey and China have become strained. When Iran's energy sector operates smoothly, it can export oil and gas to friendly countries, generating hard currency that Tehran can use to buy weapons, technology, and essential goods from Russia. But when Iranian oil workers go on strike, when refineries shut down, when ports are paralyzed by protests, that entire economic engine grinds to a halt. And that means Iran has less money to spend on Russian goods, less capacity to support Russia's military operations, and less ability to serve as Putin's strategic partner in the Middle East. This is why Putin is panicking. Look at the timeline. In early December 2025, more than 5,000 contract workers across 12 South Pars refineries staged a major coordinated strike. This was the largest labor protest in Iran in recent memory. Workers were demanding payment of months of overdue wages, better safety conditions, and an end to the brutal contract system that keeps them in permanent precarious employment with no job security or benefits. Iranian authorities tried to suppress coverage of these strikes, but videos and reports leaked out through encrypted channels and diaspora media outlets. Then, as December turned into January, the strikes didn't stop. They intensified. Workers in the petrochemical sector, steel workers in cities like Shadigan, transport workers and bazaar merchants all began joining in solidarity. By late December, the economic protests morphed into something much bigger and much more dangerous for the regime. This wasn't just about wages anymore. People started openly chanting against the supreme leader, against the Revolutionary Guard, and calling for a complete overthrow of the Islamic Republic system. The government's initial response was predictable. They deployed security forces. They shut down the internet in affected areas to prevent coordination and stop images from reaching the outside world. They arrested hundreds, possibly thousands of people. But here's the thing, it didn't work. The protests kept spreading. By the first week of January 2026, demonstrations had erupted in Tehran, Iran's capital and largest city, in Karaj, just outside Tehran, in Kermanshah, in Elam, in Loristan, and in dozens of other cities and towns across the country. Now, let me tell you why this time feels different from previous protest waves. Iran has seen major uprisings before. In 2009, the Green Movement challenged the disputed presidential election. In 2017 and 2019, economic protests turned violent and were brutally suppressed. In 2022, the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody sparked months of women-led protests under the slogan, "Woman, Life, Freedom." Each time, the regime ultimately prevailed through a combination of extreme violence, mass arrests, executions, and cutting off communications. So why should we think this time is different? Here's the difference. Iran is weaker now than at any point in the past 4 decades. The country just lost a war with Israel that exposed the vulnerability of its air defenses and military infrastructure. The regime's treasury is depleted. Its currency is worthless. Its regional proxy network has collapsed. Its air defense systems were destroyed during the conflict. International isolation has never been more severe. Food prices have skyrocketed to the point where even middle-class families are struggling. And perhaps most importantly, key sectors of the working class, particularly oil and gas workers, who have historically stayed on the sidelines during protests, are now actively participating in strikes and demonstrations. When the workers who literally keep the lights on and the economy running turn against you, you're in serious trouble. And Putin sees all of this. Russian state media has been notably quiet about the Iran protests. There's been minimal coverage compared to how much attention Russian TV usually gives to unrest in countries that are opposing the West. Why? Because Moscow doesn't want to acknowledge that its key strategic partner is teetering on the edge. But behind closed doors, you can bet that Putin's national security team is running scenarios on what happens if the Islamic Republic falls, or if a prolonged period of instability cripples Iran's ability to function as a reliable partner. Russia has invested heavily in Iran, not just economically, but also strategically. Iran provides Russia with access to the Persian Gulf, serves as a counterweight to Western influence in the Middle East, and most critically, serves as a fellow sanctions-busting partner that helps Moscow access goods and financial networks that would otherwise be closed off. If Iran's government falls, or even if it's paralyzed by ongoing instability, Putin loses a crucial chess piece on the global board. This comes at possibly the worst time for Russia. The war in Ukraine has entered its 3rd year. Western support for Ukraine remains substantial despite some political headwinds. Russia's economy is under enormous strain from sanctions and the costs of sustaining a prolonged military campaign. Moscow desperately needs allies who can provide material support, diplomatic cover, and economic lifelines. Losing Iran would be a strategic catastrophe. But there's another layer to this that we need to talk about, and that's the question of what comes next and how external powers might respond. The United States, under the incoming Trump administration, has signaled a much more aggressive stance toward Iran. Trump has publicly stated that he wants the regime in Tehran to fall, and there's been open discussion in Washington about whether the U.S. should provide support to Iranian protesters, either through amplifying their voices, facilitating communications technology, or potentially through covert operations. Israel, which fought that 12-day war with Iran, has every incentive to see the Islamic Republic weakened or toppled. The Israeli government has been vocal about its support for the Iranian people's right to protest, and there are credible reports that Israeli intelligence is monitoring the situation closely and looking for ways to capitalize on Iran's instability. Saudi Arabia, Iran's main regional rival, is also watching closely. For decades, Riyadh and Tehran have competed for influence across the Middle East, supporting opposing sides in conflicts in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and elsewhere. If Iran's government collapses, the regional balance of power would shift dramatically in Saudi Arabia's favor. At the same time, Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states are wary of complete chaos in Iran, which could lead to refugee flows, sectarian violence spilling across borders, or the potential for Iran's nuclear facilities to fall into the hands of non-state actors. It's a complicated calculation. And then there's the wild card. What does Iran's military do? The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, is not just a military force. It's an economic powerhouse that controls huge swaths of the Iranian economy. From construction to telecommunications to oil smuggling operations, the IRGC has the most to lose if the regime falls, and they have shown repeatedly that they are willing to use lethal force to maintain their power and privileges. The question is whether the IRGC can sustain that level of repression indefinitely when the economy is collapsing, when international pressure is mounting, and when their own rank-and-file soldiers might start questioning whether they want to shoot their own cousins and neighbors in the streets. History teaches us that revolutions often succeed, not when the protesters are strongest, but when the regime's security forces fracture and refuse to keep killing on behalf of a dying order. We saw this in the final days of the Shah's regime in 1979. We saw it in Eastern Europe in 1989. We saw it during the Arab Spring in 2011 in Tunisia and Egypt. The moment soldiers and police start defecting or simply stand down, the regime's days are numbered. There have been sporadic reports of security force members refusing orders or even joining protesters, but these reports are extremely difficult to verify given the information blackout that Iran's government has imposed. What we do know for certain is that the Iranian regime has shut down internet access in multiple cities and regions, a move that historically signals desperation. When governments cut the internet, it's usually because they're about to do something extremely violent that they don't want the world to see. The fact that human rights organizations are reporting death tolls in the hundreds over just the past week suggests that security forces are using live ammunition liberally. But here's the thing that terrifies authoritarian regimes. In the age of smartphones and satellite internet, it's almost impossible to completely black out information flows. Videos still get out. Witness testimonies still reach the outside world. And every video of a protester being shot, every image of a grieving mother, every testimony of brutality further delegitimizes the regime in the eyes of both Iranians and the international community. So where does this leave us? We're at an inflection point. The next few weeks are absolutely critical. If the protests continue to grow and spread, if more sectors of society join in solidarity, if the economic strikes cripple essential services and the government's ability to function, we could be witnessing the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic. But we've been here before with Iran, and the regime has always managed to survive through brutal repression. The difference this time is the convergence of crises: economic collapse, military defeat, loss of regional proxies, currency freefall, working-class mobilization, and international isolation. Any one of these would be a serious challenge. All of them happening simultaneously could be terminal. For Putin, the nightmare scenario is clear. If Iran falls or descends into prolonged chaos, Russia loses its main ally in the Middle East at a time when Moscow can least afford it. Russian influence in the region would plummet. Moscow's ability to project power and challenge Western dominance would be severely curtailed. And perhaps most importantly, it would signal to other countries in Russia's sphere of influence that alignment with Moscow doesn't guarantee stability or protection. This is why we're seeing nervous silence from the Kremlin right now. Putin's regime is built on an image of strength and the idea that Russia and its allies are on the winning side of history against a declining West. Events in Iran threaten to shatter that narrative. The Iranian people, particularly those risking their lives in the streets right now, aren't thinking about geopolitics or Putin's strategic calculations. They're thinking about feeding their families, about living in a country where you can speak your mind without getting arrested, about having a future where the currency you earn today will still have value tomorrow. They're thinking about basic human dignity. But the reality is that their struggle has massive implications far beyond Iran's borders. This is why you need to be paying attention. This is why this story matters, even if you've never been to Iran and don't plan to visit. We're living through a moment where the global order is being contested and reshaped. The war in Ukraine, the competition between the U.S. and China, the realignment of Middle Eastern politics, the struggle between authoritarian and democratic governance models, all of these massive trends intersect in what's happening in Iran right now. If the Islamic Republic falls, it would be the most significant geopolitical earthquake since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It would redraw maps, shift alliances, and potentially open up possibilities that seemed impossible just months ago. But predictions are dangerous, especially in the middle of fast-moving events. What I can tell you with confidence is that what happens in Iran over the next few weeks and months will have reverberations for years to come. The seizure of refineries and ports by workers and protesters isn't just a symbolic gesture. It's a direct challenge to the regime's ability to function. It's the Iranian people saying they would rather risk everything than continue living under a system they see as corrupt, brutal, and bankrupt, both morally and economically. And the fact that this is happening while Russia is desperately dependent on Iranian partnership makes the stakes even higher. So here's what you need to do. Stay informed. Follow credible news sources that have reporters on the ground or strong networks of sources inside Iran. Organizations like Iran International, BBC Persian Service, and various human rights monitoring groups are doing incredible work documenting what's happening despite enormous obstacles. Share information responsibly, amplify Iranian voices, and understand that the outcome of this struggle will shape the world you live in, whether you realize it or not. The Iranian people are writing history right now in the streets of Tehran, Bandar Abbas, Asaluya, and dozens of other cities. They're facing down one of the most brutal security apparatuses in the world with nothing but courage and desperation. The least we can do is witness what they're going through and understand why it matters. This changes everything. Putin's panic is real. Iran's instability is real. The potential for massive geopolitical shifts is real. And whether the Islamic Republic survives this latest challenge or whether we're watching the opening chapter of a revolution will become clear soon enough. Stay tuned. Keep watching. And don't let this story disappear from your awareness just because mainstream media might not be giving it the coverage it deserves. The world is changing before our eyes. And you just got the insider perspective on why this matters and what's really at stake. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one where we'll continue tracking this absolutely critical story.